Welcome back. We're talking about relations between China and the United Kingdom. Let's get back to our panel. Peter, let me get back to you and ask you for your view on what you've been listening to about the trade relationship between the United Kingdom and China on the one hand, and the fact that it doesn't necessarily, an improving relationship doesn't necessarily translate into a strategic alliance. I mean, given President Trump's increasingly belligerent tone on international trade, how important is it now for both the United Kingdom and China to improve that relationship?
Well, I think the United Kingdom can sort of play an intermediary role between the two nations, especially because the special relation between the UK and the United States. And as was already mentioned, the UK did make a sort of bold move to be the first major Western nation to join the AIIB. And in that sense, I think the UK can do much more. For example, it's interesting that under May's predecessor, the UK was very keen on joining the One Road, One Belt initiative. And we already see that there is this major railway link directly between China's EU and London, which brings goods over a distance from 7,500 kilometers from China directly to the UK. So these are examples of, I think, very positive things. Again, however, when you look at the Brexit and the uncertainties that are there, these are facts, and I mean really economic facts that we cannot neglect. From the point of the UK, it's very uncertain what, for example, would happen with its exports. A major export product from the UK to China is automobiles. Yeah. But if the UK will have a hard Brexit, so if it will not reach an agreement with the UK, then a lot of these automobile industries, which are actually foreign, might leave the UK. And that might have an adverse effect on the UK-China relations. So on the one hand, you see there are positive factors and that are linked to geopolitical things. On the other hand, there are also economic facts that are very difficult to pinpoint. And I think that in the coming few years, the UK-China relationship, trade relationship, will fundamentally change because of Brexit. It's crucially important now for the UK to have a clear agreement with the UK, and China will wait for that before it will make its move. So the UK cannot first move and have a trade agreement with China, because that will not work. China will wait first for the UK to have a deal with the EU before it will make its move with the UK. Okay.
Philip, a moment ago you were talking about the rules-based order internationally, a rules-based regime internationally that governs international trade. China, not so long ago, released a white paper in which it reaffirmed its commitment to the WTO. You know, there's general agreement that the WTO needs some kind of reform, and China has acknowledged that as well. Do you think China could count on the UK to reinvigorate the WTO? I mean, that response from China was largely seen as a reaction to the protectionist measures coming out of the White House.
Well, honestly, I mean, President Trump clearly and his administration have spoken against the WTO, and they are very much in favor of bilateral deals. So there's actually an issue of China and others wanting to use the WTO as a platform for globalization and global trade. But you know, in Washington, people think otherwise. The other problem with the UK, of course, is because of the Brexit situation, which is quite bad, really, at the moment. It can only speak for itself. And honestly, I don't believe Beijing should count on London for anything, really, except for a possible bilateral trade agreement. But I don't think it's going to happen either in the next 8 months. And remember that China, a few years ago, was actually in favor of the UK staying within the EU. and invested quite a lot in the UK economy just for that reason. And now, of course, that's not what's happening. Yeah. And there are less Chinese investments coming in, and the City of London is losing banks and expats to other cities in Europe, such as Frankfurt or Paris.
Nathan, the United States has raised a number of concerns with the Chinese, things like the trade imbalance, the deficit. We've heard a lot about that, the opening up of certain Chinese sectors to US investment, technology transfer. Does the United Kingdom have similar concerns? And conversely, are there sectors in the US, in the UK rather, that are closed to Chinese investment?
Yeah, very much so. Look, the UK would love to see the pace of China reform open up, because what's the UK's biggest export at the moment? Look, we talk about cars, it's actually services, financial services, insurance, the gamut, healthcare, all the things that basically the world accuses China of not opening up to. The UK economy would benefit greatly. And I just want to go back to the point of China's reform and opening up in terms of the WTO, because Europe has sort of seemed to have coalesced with China around this potential way out of the trade war, which is basically, let's change the structure of the WTO to address some of the concerns that the US has and others about the opening up, market access, subsidies, all that sort of thing, but within the WTO process to satisfy the Americans. We don't know if we're there yet, but we heard Jean-Claude Juncker talk about that at the press conference. We've heard about that with China, EU, and of course the UK is talking about that as well. Are we seeing a beginning of a coalescence around that? I'm not sure, because of the Make America Great Trumpian, let's go it alone path that we've just been talking about, but that could be somewhere where the UK helps. You heard Jeremy Hunt there hint about how the UK can explain to the rest of the world the Belt and Road Initiative. And what I think they mean by that is they're a global power in terms of trading. They've had a long history of trading across different continents, and I think to explain and to calm people's nerves about China and opening up and the reform process, as well as keeping the international institutions going and reforming them, is some role the UK can play. Now, this sounds amorphous at the moment, because it is, but I think that's where London sees itself.
Martin, I've got about 50 seconds left, and I was wondering if you could answer this. I mean, there's much talk about a free trade deal between the United Kingdom and China. Do you see that happening?
I think it's a possibility, but I think, as was said earlier, it's not imminent. I mean, you know, goodness knows how long it's going to take to sort out a relationship between the EU and the UK. It could be rather longer than we've been looking at. And until that's sorted, it's impossible, it seems to me, for China and the UK to reach some kind of agreement. But I think subsequent to that, it's a serious possibility. And one thing I think is worth bearing in mind here, and that is the British government, or the Conservative Party, is deeply divided between in different factions. And interestingly, I can say, there is quite a strong pro-China faction, actually. Yeah. By pro-China, I mean that China's rise is permanent, and that it is extremely important strategically for Britain to arrive at a closer relationship with China. And and I think that could become an important, well, that question is going to be important in the future.
Okay, and we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.